In the AFL, the Brownlow Medal is presented to the best and fairest player each year, and traditionally it goes to the rightful winner probably about 80% of the time. There have been some amazing individual efforts rewarded with the medal and some who haven't. The best individual season in AFL history, though, didn't end with a Brownlow. In fact, it was barely deemed good enough to scrape into the top 10 that year. So what happened? Throughout the pantheon of Australian rules football history, there have been some terrific individual seasons. Tom Mitchell cracking the 35 disposal per game barrier, Gary Dempsey inventing the prototypical postmodern ruckman, with Max Gawn going on and refining that concept, Matt Priddis and Scott Selwood's new age Bash Brothers act, Dustin Fletcher sweeping like a janitor at half-back, Brent Ratton's unmatched midfield bullishness. They are remarkable, sometimes unbeatable feats, highlighting elite players and Brent Ratton at their absolute best. And yet, you wouldn't have remembered most of these seasons, or even realised that they existed. Tackles, clearances, rebounds and hitouts are workmanlike stats. There's no immediate visual glory in accumulating them. No one gives a shit. For the common fan, there are only two stats anyone seems to care about: disposals and goals. Mitchell holds the record for average disposals, and he cracked open the previous mark considerably. But the sheen of a 30 disposal season has lost its lustre since McDermott, Ablett and Swan pioneered their way past it, with a flurry of players easily breaking it in recent times. Besides, the prestige that comes with being an elite ball gatherer is nothing compared to that reserved for the game's power forwards. After all, goals are what we're all here to see, and they're the only thing that really matters in footy. And when it comes to goal scoring, we're especially sport for choice for seasons of personal glory. Although the century has only been cracked once in the last 13 years, big men from the nation's top leagues have raised the bat over 160 times. And behind each of those dots, there's a great story of an elite player. There's Hudson, Davies, Cummings and Pratt cracking the 150 goal barrier, the mighty Austin Robinson and mightier Bernie Naylor pushing the record past 160 in WA, and Hudson returning home to burn everything inside. There's Ken Farmer's reign of terror in South Australia, Tony Modra crushing the league in his first full season, Gary Ablett Sr.'s final stand of the mid-sized brigade, John Coleman's insane feats in short seasons, Lance Franklin's last stand of the Centurions, and basically every season that Tony Lockett and Jason Dunstall ever played. This is a list of everyone to have kicked 100 goals not just in the AFL and VFL, but the SANFL, WAFL and TFL while they were their state's respective top leagues. Every Centurion at the top level is here. It's complete and comprehensive. From current trends, no other man will ever grace the company of these 78 goal kickers over 169 seasons. Nice. But for me, the best individual season in football ever played isn't at the top of this list. It's not second. It's not in the top 10. It ain't even in the top 20. Keep on scrolling down. For me, the best season ever played by anyone ranks 118th all time compared to its peers. Well, at least by sheer volume. It's not even the most prolific goal-scoring season this player ever had. I must sound insane, but as is seemingly the motto on this channel, one number can't tell the whole story. And Matthew Lloyd's 105 has a fair bit of backstory behind it. But first, the backstory to the backstory. Lloyd had made his debut in 1995, kicking 3 goals against Robert Shaw's perpetually underperforming Crows. It wasn't until 97 that he got a full season under his belt, booting 63, including 6 against the Bulldogs and 8 against Melbourne. Despite a lean middle of 1998, he started and finished strong, coming home with 70. He put 13 past a woeful Sydney to kick off his 1999 campaign, finishing the season a mere goal behind Coleman medalist Scott Cummings and just a bit ahead of the admittedly retiring Tony Lockett. He knocks Sydney out of the finals, ending Lockett's career, and then the Bombers fall 1 point short of the big game at the end. Lloyd had proved that he'd arrived, but he still lacked a little something. He called up someone who'd authored the best part of two clubs' legacies to that point. He borrowed wisdom in order to make his own game, already elite, just that little bit better. And much in the same way that he did to Gary Ablett Sr. and Darren Jarman, Malcolm Blight turned Matthew Lloyd into a god. Let's cut forward 12 months. Of course, his Bombers are reigning premiers, having lost only one game in 2000 to have the best team season of all time. Lloyd is the reigning Coleman medalist, his 109 goals guiding his team to the ultimate prize, having booted 4 on the big day. He finished 33 goals ahead of Jeff Farmer, and 39 ahead of the next key forward, Lance Whitnell. No, that's the wrong pitch. Lance Whitnell. There we go. At this point, he's one of the more accurate key forwards of his time, and is edging his way up the leaderboard. He's on track to finish right in amongst the best in terms of all-time goal scoring, even as defensive practices in the league are improving. He's widely tipped to repeat as Coleman medalist. His main rivals are Brisbane's Alastair Lynch, North Melbourne's Wayne Carey, Fremantle's Tony Modra, the Bulldogs' Brad Johnson, and Richmond's Matthew Richardson. All are great players and worthy opposition. Unbeknownst to all of them, Lloyd was about to blow them all out of the water. But before we unsheath the sabre of sabermetrics, let's examine Lloyd's 2001 season in isolation. He started modestly with 4 goals against an absent Carey's Roos. A similar performance followed against Port, and then 5 against Carlton. It's good, but he's actually well behind his 2000 pace at the moment, and a week's layoff and a 1-goal showing against the Pies didn't help. It's not looking like I'm making much sense here. But then he hits back. 10 goals 4 against a hapless West Coast. 13 marks, 12 inside 50s, 20 touches. He was irresistible. Small pickings of 4 and 3, and then he unleashes again. 8 against a competitive Hawks outfit, making a mockery of their defence. He manages 3 against the best team in the comp, Brisbane. And then St Kilda. 2 goals 5. Make a note of this, as it's the first and only time his single game accuracy dips below 50% all season. There's a reason he still gets gigs teaching big leaguers how to kick straight, and whatever he did to straighten himself up must have been pretty intense, because here's how the next month reads. 6, 5, 5, 6. It was a monumental effort, 22 in a month, and 66 from 14 for the season. Then, round 16, Kangaroos versus Essendon, a team that would end up 13th playing the reigning premier and ladder leader who'd won 45 of their last 49 games. So guess which side kicked 12 goals in the first quarter? Yep, you'd be dead wrong. The Kangaroos wanted revenge for their humiliation at the hands of those in red and black in the previous year's finals series. Already, in one quarter, North had almost equalled their score from that day about 10 months prior. And Lloyd was nowhere. He'd kicked the second goal of the game, but as North piled on the pain, he became irrelevant. David King, with the last kick of the quarter, looks to put a baker's dozen on Essendon in the first term alone, but misses. Truly the unlucky 13th. But there's a nice poetic nature to it. 73, their score in that other Bombers game. Rumour has it that it was this behind that galvanised the Bombers. Their foes had missed. They were human. 12 minutes into the second quarter though, the Kangaroos didn't look too human. Shannon Grant put North 69 points up. Nice. Then Jason Johnson and James Hird cut into the lead in quick succession, and Matthew Lloyd needed no further invitation. Very few people in the AFL era have put together a 5-goal quarter. It takes a level of superiority that a national league just shouldn't allow. Lloyd got his first early, and then after his captain had opened the door for him, kicked 3 in a row in a span of only 10 minutes. Lloyd's 5th at a term brought the gap down to 27, and when Johnson closed the quarter with another goal, the gap was down to 21. Lloyd began third by putting his team within 7, and added an 8th as the two sides began to go goal for goal. He opens the final period with his 9th, 8 points the gap, and the Bombers surge. Lloyd has done the heavy lifting, his work is done. The second stringers finish off the ruse, and the big man has done the impossible to drag his team back to win in what is the single greatest game of regular season football in the AFL era, if not of all time. He follows it up with 2 sets of 4, and then takes a 2-week break. He returned with another 7 against West Coast, and 6 against the Tigers from 8 marks and 8 kicks to end the regular season. He plays the same team the next week in the first final, and Richmond just does not learn. Another 4. He misses the preliminary final, but Essendon squeaks by the Hawks. He leads scoring with 5 on grand final day, but unfortunately for him, new kings are crowned. So, 105 goals from 21 games at an average of exactly 5. Not shabby, especially for the era. The Silvani-led focus on defence had curbed overall scoring, and forwards being required to have greater mobility and ground coverage limited individual scoring ability from the dizzy days of the 80s and 90s. Consider as well that in 1994 quarters had been shortened to 20 minutes, so 105 goals was right on pace, but not exceptional compared to top scorers for the time. And with that many shots comes a lot of failed shots. Accuracy, especially if you're Lance Franklin, can really show a season was one of missed chances. Peter Sumic's only 100-goal season and Bob Pratt's 150-goal record run are excellent examples of this. So if someone like Sumic was wayward with 111 goals 89, surely Lloyd had a bit more of an accurate season with his 105 goals. Well, he did. "105 goals, 36. To really put that into perspective, Lloyd's strike partner Scott Lucas scored 2 less behinds while scoring 70 less goals. All goal kickers who've ever booted over 600 for their careers tend to go between 60 and 65% accuracy. To go at 74% over a whole 100-goal season is something only Tony Lockett, Peter Hudson, and Matthew Lloyd have ever done. But who did it the best? Lockett's season had more number 1s and 2s than a children's paddling pool, and Hutto's 69 season, nice, contained a goose egg, and both had more playing time to achieve their feats. As for Hudson's 1970 season, he was locked in a titanic battle with Peter McKenna and, to a lesser extent, Alex Jesaulenko. He beat out McKenna by only 3 goals, showing he wasn't all that far ahead of his closest rivals, or at least the ones in his league. Fred Phillis and Austin Robinson put in similar levels of performance from less available games from other leagues of similar skill, for example. The gaps between the leader and the field are always a good measure of true supremacy. Even in Bob Pratt's unprecedented 1934 season, there was still a handful of players in his postcode. And in Hudson's Pratt equalling 1971 season, second placed McKenna was still within 16. Hell, in WA when Bernie Naylor kicked 167, he only gapped second placed Ray Scott by 24 goals. In 2020, Tom Hawkins led home Josh Kennedy by a mile, but Kennedy played 4 fewer games. Apart from that, these days, the gap between first and second is always close. In 2001, it wasn't. Do not adjust your monitor. These pictures are correct. In 2001, Matthew Lloyd missed 4 games, played less than most of his opposition, and yet he almost lapped the field in terms of goals scored. And to those of you who think Lloyd relied on free kicks to get this far, he didn't. The man nicknamed the Velvet Sledgehammer because he never left the bruise, had just left the whole league bloodied and battered. No one has ever done what he's done, at least in AFL VFL history. Only one man came close, Jason Dunstall, during years where his main rival Tony Lockett missed over half of each season with injury. Dunstall was a true legend, but he had played this particular game with the net down. Lloyd's opponents, however, mostly played more than him. Even after factoring in the ageing Wayne Carey and Tony Modra both missing 8 games, Lloyd's dominance is even more obnoxious, even more unparalleled. No man who kicked over 30 goals that season came within 2 goals per game of the big man in the red sash. To really hammer this home to the contemporary viewer, this would be like Tom Mitchell getting 800 disposals, while every other rival without exception topped out at around 450, an average of 20 per game. If Max Gawn wanted to better Brodie Grundy's 2019 mark of 1,022 hitouts by a similar margin to Lloyd, he'd need to break his own hitout record by over 400, nearly a 40% improvement. Even Brett Ratton's insane clearance record, the one that's still mind-bogglingly unbreakable today, despite every advantage that's handed to the modern midfielder, falls short of Lloyd's goal-kicking supremacy within its own season. And it wasn't like he was in a weak field. Richardson, Lynch, Johnson, Hall and the brothers Rocker are among the greatest goal kickers of all time and were all in the prime of their careers. Treadray and Tarrant were elite goal scorers, and Daniel Bradshaw was one of the finest strikers of a ball the game has ever seen. This field of frontmen is as elite as any, and Lloyd made them all look like little children. And again, it's not like he did it in a stat no one cares about like rebounds or running bounces. This is a stat that fans spill out onto the ground to celebrate. Lloyd owned the only stat that actually dictates whether teams win games, the only stat directly servicing the primary aim of his sport by a margin no one else has ever dominated any other publicly available stat for. We will likely never see this sort of thing ever again. And no one cares. It's getting to the point where teams feel like they can actually ignore the guidance of this man, to fix their wayward kickers. This isn't some obscure 1920s feat scattered to the sands of time with no living witnesses to tell the story. This happened during my lifetime, and yet I, an avid and lifelong football fan who has a family member who supports Lloyd's club, only stumbled onto it accidentally, researching stats for another video. He's known for throwing grass and hitting Brad Sewell, not for doing this or this. It's time we put some proper respect on the name of the man who, if not for an injury-wiped 2006, would have been the first man to kick 1,000 goals entirely within the AFL era. It would be the last slice of glory for his team. Essendon began a finals win drought in 2004 which hasn't ended yet, including this awful period. It dwarfs all other current streaks. So these 2 seasons are all the modern Bombers fans can really cling to. And in 2001, his best was an all-time best. His dominance is without peer within the history of its sport. It's the greatest ever individual season of all time.